my cheat sheet.
Go ahead and pull up a cheat sheet. I'm relying on you two today.
Does this count as a cheat sheet?
There you go.
Does this count as a cheat sheet? I'm ready. I'm ready. Let's go.
By the way, please feel free to share that image with the camera.
I absolutely will. Absolutely will.
See, my cheat sheet is Wikipedia.
I mean, I'm not mad at that. My cheat sheet is Wikipedia. That's what we'll call it right there.
There you go. Right.
I mean, Invincible is one of those comics that by the time people started talking about it, it was way far in, and I just couldn't pull the trigger.
I get it. Ironically, the thing that got me onto Invincible was Wizard Magazine. Absolutely ironic, swear.
Hello and welcome to Dark Loops. Why is this so good? To where today we discuss Robert Kirkman's graphic novel that inspired the Amazon Prime series Invincible. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher at Illinois State University. And joining me on the conversation today is the hardest working man in comics and the doctor of comics himself. So Victor, please tell the audience who you are.
Hello, I'm Victor Dandridge, aka the hardest working man in comics, and I am a huge Invincible fan, have been for so very long. I adore this series, and it definitely inspired me in my creations through Vantage and House Productions, my self-publishing imprint, as well as just being an avid comic book fan and reader. So this is a huge thing for me. I'm super excited.
So, Mr. Hardest Working Man in Comics, do you have any physical evidence of your commitment to this?
No, not really. What do you mean? I mean,
well, I
know,
that's fantastic.
Just a little bit of light reading, if I'm being honest, you know what I'm saying? It's like a little.
That's awesome. Stanford, how about you? Who are you?
Hi, I'm Dr. Stanford Carpenter, cultural anthropologist, aka Brother Story. I'm going to be honest. I came a little late to the party with Invincible. It had been on the shelves, and I had seen it, and then people, several years in, they kind of schooled me to it. And I got to say, I'll say in advance, I'm loving this cartoon.
I
agree.
I tell you what, this is my physical evidence, and I have to admit I'm a Johnny come lately.
We're happy that you're here. That's what matters.
There's so much good stuff out there, and I came to the comic late. I saw that they were going to be producing the animated series, so I got the graphic novel and I read through issue 12 and stopped because I said that's the season finale. Right there. But I'm so glad to be here with the two of you, because the thing is, this is a hero story. How many hero stories have we seen? So what is it about this one that you guys think really lets it stand out?
Do you want to jump in, Stanford?
I'm gonna let the fan go first.
Okay, not a problem. No, the thing that makes this stand out is that the approach to it is counter superhero norms. It sets up the tropes that we all know, but then purposefully aims to deviate off of that path. So it gives us that comfort zone and then dives headlong off of the bridge that is the norm of comic stuff. And it's only appropriate that Amazon was the one to pick this up, as they have given us The Boys, which also delves into that realm of these are the, superhero, supermanish tropes that we know. But no, not at all. And this series, it's such a perfect example of that ideology. However, to a degree dialed down, but only like a degree, right? Like it's not as vindictive. It's definitely as violent and bloody, but not as vindictive of a detour. So if there was, I would say like Invincible and The Boys are both like the love child of Watchmen and the statement of superheroes, but one is the older brother and one is the younger brother. So that is definitely what I love about it.
Yeah, I really. Oh, go ahead, Stanford.
Well, I mean, one thing that I thought is interesting is that Invincible kind of goes into well-tread territory in terms of the deconstruction of the superhero, right? But what I think is interesting about the way Invincible approaches is that it so embraces the optimistic aesthetics that we associate with the hero, and in particular with this animated piece, some of the most optimistic appearing illustrations and animation, and just pulls the cover right pulls the cover right off, and then pulls the rug out from underneath.
Absolutely.
I absolutely love the way it's a Superman story, right? Comes from another planet. He's gonna come here and help, and they have this whole story that they tell about what a noble place he's from. And then what I gotta tell you, I loved about the animated series was episode 1 ends with him killing, Guardians of the Globe, and it's like, oh, this ain't Superman.
No.
And I thought it was a bold move to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit that soon, right? Because it sets up this detective vibe then of why do you do it? And
But
then his son gets asked, why'd you do it? Go ahead, man.
But it also does in a way that engages the most optimistic tropes, right? Because even though we see him kill the Guardians of the Globe, right? It still makes all these references that makes us think, oh, there's some other explanation. Maybe it's someone disguised as him. Oh, maybe he was mind controlled. In fact, there's even, he's being mind controlled. He must be being mind controlled all the way up in the last, in the season finale, right?
Who's making you do this, Dad?
And so that's the moment where I love the way that they play with the trope, because I'm really interested in when you're going to subvert the trope. I prefer to see it subverted in small ways, small ways that have big implications, as opposed to doing it in really, really big ways, and then me feeling like I'm left with someone who wasn't able to follow through on anything.
Right. That is such an important description, because the books arguably do what you said, and it's for the most interesting and compelling reason. This is kind of, telling tales, behind the scenes, but the big reveal that those of us that have been longtime readers, we were waiting for while watching the show, it wasn't supposed to happen in the books when it happened. And arguably the series jumps the shark, and almost nothing matches that reveal. Like when that happens, the rest of the series, nothing comes close to it. And it's because it wasn't supposed to happen when it did. The book wasn't doing so well sales wise and was going to get canceled. So if I'm not mistaken, like that particular reveal was supposed to happen around issue 25. So it's supposed to be like a, big landmark issue. This is where the shoe drops, and we get this new context of Nolan and Omni-Man and what his real purpose is on Earth. But the book wasn't going to make it that far. And the powers that be told Kirkman, like, if you have this big thing, you better drop it now. You better do it now. And that's why it happens within the first year. It was not supposed to happen that way. And of course, the outcome of it surged book sales like none other. And that's how Invincible was able to survive to reach its 144 issue run. But it wasn't even gonna make it that far.
But that's also the dilemma of something like this, is that I don't want to, I hope this doesn't sound like I'm hating on it, but if you were to take out the reveal, take out the reveal that Omni-Man's I'm trying to think of a good pun.
An intergalactic Nazi. I mean, come on. Intergalactic Nazi.
Yeah. But once you take, if you don't have that, what you're left with is a pretty boring generic superhero story, right? And so the problem is, if you're going to subvert a boring generic superhero story, but you don't tell us you're subverting it,
right,
you're just left with a boring generic superhero story that is probably not going to hold anyone's interest.
Very true. Very true.
So we'll call this crowd editing, right? Where the people that were reading it were like, dude, you need to tell us why we're reading this now, right? Because we've seen this before.
Kind of. And the show actually integrates more of the original version into it, because there's things that happen out of order from that big reveal. Mark
Right.
going to Mars, that happened after the big reveal. His relationship with Amber happened after the big reveal. Like, there's all these things that they have re-edited, reshuffled to kind of fit what I presume is the original intent of the book.
Oh, well said.
But it's not the way that, you know, it ended up coming out. So that makes it even more compelling to me as a longtime reader, because this is a new experience for me as well. My, you know, my previous knowledge doesn't really help me, other than to say, like, when are they going to do that thing? Oh my God, are they going to do that? It's now that, okay, no, they're not doing it.
Yeah.
I didn't want it. Oh, they still do it.
Well, I got to tell you, I was reading issues 9, 10, and 11 as the series was going on. And so I read issue 12, which is where the reveal happens in the series. And I thought, okay, this is the big thing. And I got to tell you, when I watched it on TV, I'm not going to lie, I thought the dialogue in the comic was smoother. I thought the dialogue in the comic was at a pace that made more sense. And of course, when you're reading, you get to be your own actor, right? So the voices are always the best. But there was some really, really good stuff in the comic that I felt they rushed through just a little bit in the reveal, father telling the son his own origin story, that I thought was very powerful in the comic. And I remember reading it and saying, this is so cool. Superman was a Nazi, right? I mean, that was just a real, I mean, kind of obvious big twist, but nonetheless, very well executed. I was very, very excited.
I mean, I have to, oh, go ahead.
I think that it's clear that the powers that be at Amazon very much understood the problems with putting off the big reveal. And I think that them doing the big reveal, and I say big reveals early, right? Because killing the Global Guardians is a reveal separate from us finding out that he's really here to take over Earth, right? You know, I think that they learn their lesson. They learn the lesson from the comic, but I think that they also learn their lesson from a Justice League series that we don't. That you know, Brad Meltzer's. I'm forgetting the name of it. The one where we find out that Dr. Light raped Sue Dibney.
Identity Crisis.
Yeah, Identity Crisis, right? Because they also understood that you can go too far, too off the rails, and at that point you just lose people and you don't come back. You know, like the boys is interesting in that they got away with as much debauchery as they did without losing the audience. But I also think that there's a couple of key things that helped them. I think that the boys was helped by the Me Too movement. I can see that. I think that and how they handled their intersection with the Me Too movement. If they had gone with what had happened in the boys with I'm forgetting her name.
With Starlight?
The Starlight.
Right.
In terms of the comic, they would have lost the entire audience. Everybody. And for people who don't understand, in the comic, Starlight is basically sexually assaulted by all of the men in the group,
right?
While the one woman hero sits and watches,
right?
You know, and in the television show, it's like it was one character, and then they create a separate arc around that character about how that character is removed from his position, right? But the other characters are still just as bad, and they appear to be good because they supported that guy being removed even while they were doing worse things. Right. That level of complexity is what pulls people in. It allows for there to be that sexual assault without turning everybody off because there's a consequence. There's something similar going on over here in terms of understanding and managing these types of things. You know, first of all, you know what I said earlier about if you're going to deviate and you're going to criticize, you're going to go against the genre, you want to do it in small ways. They made a definite decision to deal with in Invincible to focus on on issues around violence and consequence having to do with violence.
Mm-hmm.
We have, I mean, we don't have the sexual violence that we have in the boys, which the boys really forefronts.
Yet,
you know,
let's say yet, if they follow some certain storylines,
right.
yet.
But and I understand that there's more to come, but the point is that we're dealing with that first. Like and what I'm talking about is, and really what I'm talking about is understanding manageable story chunks when it relates to trauma.
Right.
And
they didn't kill you over the head with it.
Right. And because we're also seeing a controversy in horror about that. Like, look at people's reaction to them versus their reaction to Get Out, to Lovecraft Country, right?
Right.
I honestly think that's an issue of pacing and managing the amount of trauma people have to digest in a single episodic moment, right? And so I think that's one thing I find really interesting. It also, the other thing that this makes me think of, and I'm going to be, this is going to be a geek moment. This is one of my in my top 5 comics.
Okay.
Is the first 12 issues of Elementals, the Kamiko run.
Okay.
And I immediately glommed onto it because as a very, very young kid, when I was reading it, I was like, it was the first time that I saw violence with consequence. And that really mattered to me because of racialized violence I had experienced and was experiencing. Because so I had this idea in my head, and I didn't quite understand that violence had a consequence that was not that was not really reflected. Like, you know, if you light someone on fire,
they burn.
They burn, and they're horribly and they're horribly scarred for the rest of their lives in many cases. Somehow that never happens with the Human Torch, right? So it's that kind of stuff, and I thought that was really interesting. And this took the violence and consequence to a whole new level, which is no, you don't have buildings fall on people, and they break an arm and there's no blood. No, they get crushed and they
are
die.
Eviscerated.
Yeah.
Dismembered, maimed.
And these lasers that they use to disable a car, if it touches a human being, it's over, right? But I think but that's an important story element, because what it does is it also makes us look at these superhero battles as mass casualty events.
Yes. Like you gotta look at this show and wonder, what's it like to try to be an insurance company in this world? It's got to be impossible,
21st
right? Like, it's got to be impossible when there's the potential of superhero like threats all over the place happening. And that's before the big reveal of episode 8. Like, just the general consensus of what sort of violence could occur. We see in this world, the White House is outfitted with like paramilitary weaponry on the outside, because that's the level of violence that they expect in this world. Like, they set that off from episode 1, that there's like anti-air, high artillery, or I guess not high enough artillery, if you will, guns mounted on the roof of the White House. The level of violence that this world already kicks off with, already has the understanding of, you're absolutely right. Like, it's high. And the thing that makes it really interesting in comparison to the books are the things that it starts with. So you start with the Guardians of the Globe. That is not what you start with in the books. Like, it becomes very personalized and about Mark and Mark only, and then kind of goes to expand a little bit to involve his dad, and you see how great his dad is, and then it expands just a little bit more to involve the Guardians. Here we're kind of setting that tone, like, no, there are like major superheroes here, and even in this world where the White House has these crazy guns mounted on top, the heroes show up. Like, they still are there in order to exact more violence, in order to stop worse violence. Like, that's what they're there for, which is brilliant.
So while I got you to here, this may seem a little left, but it's kind of inspired by what you guys have been saying. We are seeing a slew I would say starting with Watchmen, of a questioning of the hero genre, a questioning of the Joseph Campbellian hero's journey sort of thing. I'm wondering how much what's going on is we're changing who the big baddie is, right?
Yes.
I mean, you look at this, in this case, the big baddie is one dude who represents this huge Nazi planet, right? And we can talk about, for example, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. In that show, the big baddie, no one really talked about it afterwards, was privatization and corporate greed. I mean,
Yes.
the speech that he gives at the end, where he's talking to these world leaders and say, you could change this in a heartbeat.
Yep.
They didn't come out and say you're the big baddie, but he said this young lady died because of the world you've created. So, it's not like we hate, is that we're telling the same individual hero story, but we're putting it in a different big baddie world, or is there something else going on?
I think there's something else going on. Like, I think that what we're doing is we're becoming very introverted and reiterating the statement that Watchmen kind of made, which is we have this idiom that we believe that, being all powerful corrupts absolutely, or absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? These superheroes are absolute power, and they always have been. We just always look at them on the side of the angels, always. But what we never really do is consider them as actual people, and that becomes more of a context, and really something that I think is really fueled by current events, as we are looking at police brutality, who are, the police are supposed to be the good guys, but they're actual people. So however they are in their natural, realistic selves is just what they're projecting by having this absolute power. And so we're kind of looking at things in the superhero context saying, you know what, who these guys are, like intrinsically, it doesn't matter what they do, who they are can become problematic, and their rationale and reasons.
I agree with parts of what you're saying. I come at it a little differently. Because a lot of what I've been writing about has been power fantasies in comics, right? And what I think is interesting is that the superhero genre is actually based on power fantasies. But what's interesting and what makes it uniquely American is that it's one of the only places is in the American superhero, and I'd say specifically the American superhero, in which we have this view of power. We have this view of power that power is best used for society if given to the individual, and that individual is unfettered in terms of his loyalty. And instead of having loyalty to a state or to a government, right, or to a higher power, choice, has loyalty to a constituency. So it's a different power relationship. And that goes all the way back to Superman, right? It's like, and so what happens is that the superhero genre, the way they define a superhero versus a supervillain, is the superhero is the one who is not corrupted and thus uses their power, finds a way to use their power for the best good.
Right.
Now, and you see the support, and what I also, when you think about it, so when you start thinking about it, why I say uniquely American is that it's like, even when you go to Great Britain, when you go to England and Robin Hood, right? Robin Hood steps in because the king is busy on the Crusades. So he's actually representing the king.
Right.
He's cleaning up the kingdom. And when the king returns, what does Robin Hood do? Retire.
Yeah.
So there's not a critique of power. I'm sorry. There's not a critique of the structural hierarchy in there. In fact, it supports the structural hierarchy. And so with all these other areas, there's like this higher power of the state or a god that the hero serves. And this, that the hero serves the people, serves his or her constituents. And so what I think is interesting about these power fantasies is that has to do with the location of power, and the location of power in these very white Anglo-Saxon Protestant worlds, right? And so then you start getting into why it is that Black Panther becomes interesting, not so much in the comics, but in the movie. Like Black Panther, I would argue, doesn't become Afrofuturist until the movie. if you look at the comics, because it's still it had to do with the power relation to the democratization of power. What I think is interesting about what's happening with some of these new configurations is I'm not entirely sure that power is the problem, because what keeps happening in the superhero genre is that the hero's journey is the struggle to figure out how best to use the power.
Right.
So like Spider-Man is not just about being powerful. It's like with great power comes great responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And every iteration of Spider-Man is about him rediscovering and renegotiating what responsibility is, right?
So let me I love what you just said, renegotiating what responsibility is. And the question I have then is, what's more true then? That you're going to consistently revise what responsibility is? In other words, our definitions of how power should be used are going to continually change, or that power is right or wrong. In other words, this constant rewriting of ourselves, this constant rewriting of the hero genre, what's more true, the fact that we have heroes or that we continually rewrite what they are? And for me, it's this idea that we're constantly as a culture, as I would argue as individuals, sort of re-examining who we are. And then we either say, no, I'm going to stay the same. And we surround our world in a way, create a world where we can stay the same, or we say, change is actually what I dig on. It's who I am, and we work to make our world that way. If that was a non-starter, that's fine.
I think it's got something.
I actually think that a lot of the renegotiation comes around issues with constituency.
How so?
So what I think is one of the things I also think is interesting is when I said earlier about when I talk about power and constituency, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the responsibility that's being negotiated is always in relationship to the constituency of the superhero, i.e., what I am doing for my people, right? Or the people who have identified as my people.
Yes.
And even X-Men is very interesting in terms of what it does. It says, fighting for a world that hates and fears them, right? Mm-hmm. But by saying fighting for a world, it's saying fighting for a constituency that hates and fears us. So there's still a declaration of who your constituency is. And that becomes really important, because in the genre, what's interesting is it's like a superhero, when they say a superhero can't kill, they're really saying the superhero isn't supposed to kill anyone within their constituent base. And we see that when Superman, protects the world and kills some alien looking monster.
Right.
Right. It's clearly outside of the constituency.
Right. That's okay.
It's outside of the identification. And so I think that what's interesting is that when you start getting into the 60s, 70s, 80s, you start having questions amongst the readership, which also become questions amongst the constituency, i.e., they just didn't really care how these characters represented these different groups back then, many of them. Superman's kind of interesting in that Superman always had a bigger constituency in terms of its creation than its readers, but I think that also has to do with being created by two Jewish kids in Cleveland, or two Jewish kids from Cleveland,
right?
For a publication that did not have two Jewish kids from Cleveland as part of their readership, right?
Right.
But when you really start getting into it, that's what I feel is happening. And I feel like these renegotiations, and I think now you have these renegotiations, because it's easier to renegotiate that than take the next step. And the real next step is a democratization of power coupled with a decentering of whiteness.
That's a very interesting presentation, because I get a different outlook on it. What I say is the changing factor is, what does it mean to have power? What is power? The thing that is powerful is the thing that's changing. And I think Superman is a great reference for that, because when he was first created, the number of powers that we associate with Superman today, he didn't have all of them.
Right.
And the idea of that power changing is the thing. It's not even necessarily who has power, it is what does having power look like. Like that's the part that really changes, because you know, as and it's so very interesting, Scott, you're still in like issue 12 of the book, right? Okay.
Right.
So for my, you know, I've read a little bit more, right? Just a little bit. I'll just touch my stack of books here.
Right.
The idea of power it gets flipped on its head so hardcore when it comes to the Viltrumites that you almost understand why they do what they do. And there is a thing that is revealed, and upon that revelation, you go, what you're doing is not about subjugation per se, it is about survival. And the only way that you know how to survive is to subjugate, which is true. That is what we do as individuals, as people, as we decided to build societies and civilization. We started to subjugate everything that we saw from nature, animals, our environment. We subjugated in order to survive. The Viltrumites are a universal version of that. So there becomes a point where you go, well, you're not bad, you're just trying to survive. And we didn't look at it that way, because we were the cattle in this instance. You know what I mean? Like, we're the ones that, you know, are experiencing your survival, and we're feeling like our survival is threatened. Well, it is, but that is literally the way that nature works. It's that idea of, you know, when it comes to the goodness of power, it's a mixed bag, right? Like, is it good power when the gazelle gets away? No, because the lion goes hungry. But is it good power when the lion gets the gazelle? Because the gazelle dies, but the lion's not hungry. You know, like, there's this flux of what is power that we're seeing. And I think, again, this is what.
But I think you also stepped into what I mean about the importance of constituency and all this.
Right.
Because my response to that is, what does the hero of the Tigers look like versus the heroes of the Gazelle?
Exactly.
And I think that's very much tied into the superhero genre, because you have other characters that have power. They're called supervillains, and oftentimes they either represent a radically different constituents, or they become incredibly corrupted by their power. Right.
That's what makes Civil War such a compelling story, both in book and in film, because this isn't two supervillains or a superhero and a supervillain. It's two heroes. Both of them are right. They just disagree. And now when you're talking about splitting the constituency into factions of degrees, like, well, I kind of see the point. Well, like, then it gets even more deep, because your constituency is the same, which ultimately, if you've read the books, answers as to why the outcome is what the outcome is. When one person goes to, you know, honor my constituency, I have to step down, because I'm not living for what I said my constituency was. And I think that's what you're saying is dead on for that.
So what I want to do is I want to speak to what both of you have said. Stanford, I love this notion of heroes representing the power of a constituency. And Victor, I love the nature and the gazelle lion example, because what we're looking at is we could perhaps think of as a principle of living. And what I mean by that is, a single cell organism can't be a single cell organism if a border isn't created that lets it be a system away from everything else. And we often don't talk about the destructive nature of living, the destructive nature of BEING. And if you look at a bog, these things are just carving each other up and eating each other every second. So it seems to me like we're at this point now where, coming out of the Renaissance, coming out of the Enlightenment, coming into the American democracy experience, and living in this view of goodness and rightness. Now, I would argue 20th century kind of, wait a minute, all these systems necessarily, and I'm using that in a strong sense, necessarily give rise to and sustain borders. And I think for us to have to talk about power in ways that might help us change things without staying in the good bad thing, is for us to recognize that all living systems necessarily generate borders. And then what we have to do is generate borders that we can all respect.
Right.
The border of creation is not going away. And, you know, Stanford, when you talk about constituencies, I see
That's really good too.
I see groups having power, i.e. the ability to express themselves in the market that didn't have power 30 years ago. And as they have that power and exert that power creatively, we see a lot of what we're seeing right now, and it is fantastic. And I love the way these new heroes are being extremely reflective on the nature of power. And I predict, if it hasn't already been written, there will be a graphic novel about this idea of life necessarily being destructive. People don't like to talk that way, and you know, but how do we manage the fact that we're entropy systems, right?
Well, but I think that one thing. So what I think is interesting is I've lately been really obsessed with nature shows, and it comes back to this whole idea of like one little difference. And I'm really obsessed. And the obsession started with my interest in science fiction and seeing aliens being represented, and thinking to myself, and actually going back to some of my training as, you know, in physical anthropology, that whole discipline that I hated learning about, that now I'm appreciating. But like learning about, but also learning about little things like birds that see in the ultraviolet, and that have patterns on them in the ultraviolet, which means that they have not just one or two extra colors, they have multiples of extra colors by that, because they have that ultraviolet plus red, ultraviolet plus yellow. So like this bird that looks brown to us is actually this really bright, shiny thing to another bird, you know? And so, and this also comes from a friend of mine whose only job was to study eyeballs. It was really bizarre. But he was explaining.
What's wrong with that, man?
What it explained to me is how, is what I started, what it brought home to me is how we have a very different perceptual base. Right?
Yeah.
That so much of our world is, you know, you start talking about social facts, and in social sciences, we talk about them very theoretically, but there are areas where we can talk about them much more concretely if we start looking at things like animals that see in the ultraviolet, animals that see electromagnetic waves, like they actually see it in the sky. That's how birds navigate. They can see into that spectrum, right?
That is my superpower.
And so like I know this. So what's interesting to me is like realizing that that one of the things that's unique about primates, like monkeys, is that we are particularly brutal.
Yes.
Like in the animal kingdom, if you look at primates, right? It's like when you see these monkeys, they get mad about territory. When one group of monkeys goes into another monkey's territory, what do? They kill the young. Like they just they kill and eat the young. I mean, I'm just like, wow, that's terrible. I'm like, oh wait, that's us.
Yeah.
But there's entire segments of the animal kingdom, right? Where and it's unique that our obsession with violence, destruction is very unique to our species. There are entire species. There are other species like praying mantis that they'll eat each other. They'll eat each other doing anything. But then there's others. But then there's species out there that will never touch one another. They don't eat each other. Like and so what's interesting is you start to think about, well, what if cows, even like cows are actually relatively close to us. What if cows grew up or evolved and became a dominant species? There's no precedent for there's not a precedent for the violent takeover of territory and consuming one another,
right,
in the way that they organize or the way that they are. So my question is, would you really even have anything that looks like war from a species that never employed it if they evolve? And so how does that change how we look at aliens, right? And now that you bring the question down to something even like superheroes, where like all of our metaphors, we assume that the universe is built on this sort of like tension between destructive forces. But that also comes out of our species.
Right,
It's kind of what our
right.
species does.
It's like
Other
saying,
species-
what is it like? Oh my God, jellyfish. You don't know if they distinguish between themselves, right? Like
Right.
they just like when they're at this big collection of jellyfish, you have no idea if they are all related. Do they care if you are a different species of jellyfish? So they just like, sup. Do they just float in the water together? Or like us would be like, well, you're different from me. And because the star on your belly isn't the same as the star on my belly, you sneech, you gotta stand over there.
Right.
Or yeah,
By
that's
the
a
way,
good point,
the
man.
type of
One of the
jellyfish.
best animated shows ever. That story, I saw that when I was a kid, and that just set me off for life.
It's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Use that every day.
But there's even which I can't remember which of the jellyfish it is, where it's not actually a single being, it's a collection of beings.
Wow.
Like
That's
like
awesome.
they're more loosely connected. So like the digestive system is actually a single. It actually functions as a single being in a parasitic relationship
Wow.
with. I mean, it's just really interesting, and so that challenges even notions of subjectivity, right?
Right.
And you start to think in terms of like how we narrowly think within our bodily constructs, our historical constructs, our evolutionary constructs. There's other creatures out there where where they go through these evolutionary stages. So let one of those things evolve, and you're going to see a world construct that's all about evolution.
I promise you, this book series does exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
It's such a great example of everything that you just said, of introducing a concept of a character who has a perspective, comes to understand that their perspective is infinitely limited by their experience. And as they start to experience things, they have to grow in terms of their understanding and perspective. I'm telling you, Stanford, once you like read this thing, you'll go, this is literally one of the greatest comics of all time, because it touches that, where the concept of who Mark is at the beginning of this series versus who he is at the end of the series is such a vast 180 that it ends up 360ing and coming back all into itself. It's fantastic.
And yeah, exactly. And I mean, I'm actually looking forward to seeing how it's kind of a pun, but how this evolves.
Yeah.
And how they manage the evolution in the animated series.
Yeah, me too.
Because because some of the things we're talking about at a story level are really hard to convey, because some of them actually take more time than a lot of readers are going to sit through.
Very true. Very true.
Well, that's the skill of the writer, is to keep the reader engaged at multiple levels to get to that big jackpot complex thing they wanted to do, because they've kept it, kind of interesting throughout. I just quickly want to the cow thing. I dig on what you're saying, and at the same time, a cow is just as much about whatever it is that eats a cow as it is about grass. And what I mean is, not only are jellyfish tuned into each other, I would argue, little Fullmetal Alchemist, one is all is one. Everything is tuned into what everything is, because evolution doesn't happen in a place. Evolution is. There is nothing that's not part of the everything that's evolving.
Right.
So for me, I like to look at organisms as what I call embodiments of context. And I look at our minds as embodiments of context. And I look at our agency as kind of trying to manage ourselves in a context. And so for me, everything's about everything. And here's, for me, the issue of power, the issue of violence, I do love it when the narratives take us through these complex places, and it sounds like, Victor, you're taking us, the story is going to take us there, because I think most humans live in what I'll call a gradient of violence. And What I mean by that is, you know, if you ask people, would you be violent in this situation? Um, I suspect that they would indicate that if it's about their family, yes, I'd protect my family. If it's my kin, yes, I'd protect my kin. And it's the further out you get from my immediate life and love, the more rhetoric you have to throw on me to convince me to be violent against someone else. And, you know, the whole story that Omni-Man tells his son is 1,000-year Reich, right? And you build this narrative to convince people to objectify others in a way and be willing to kill them. But I just think that violence, right or wrong, is just not the way I have to admit. I think about it. It's not the way I've seen people live.
Before you continue, I want to jump in on what you just said. The 1,000-year Reich part. The thing that makes that interesting to me is the lack of the inherent idea of betterment of one species versus the other. The Viltrumites don't inherently think that they're better than anyone. They earned it amongst themselves. Like, based on what we saw in this last episode, they culled themselves till they only had the strongest versions of them left.
Right.
And I think that's a very interesting idea. Before they went and said that they were better than anyone else, they called themselves internally to prove it. Like, to say, like, we got rid of everything that we thought was weak from ourselves. So like, when we come to you and we're like, we can cure a disease, we can cure this, we know because we did it. Like, we did it, and this is what we're doing. And the outcome of that first internal subjugation now becomes the expression of their outward subjugation. It's I think it's very, like, there's a minutia of difference, but it's such a specific difference that I'm like, every time that you've made this reference to them being Nazis, I'm almost like, not quite. And for me, it's because I know what they did in order to be in this position, which I don't believe that anything I've ever seen in the Nazi party ever had the Nazi party going, what aren't we doing? Is always them. You guys, you did this, you did this, and you're the reason why we don't have. You're the reason why we don't have. The Viltrumites said, we're the reasons why we don't have. And we're going to get to the point where we solve that, we eliminate that thing, ultimately giving power unto themselves to now go out and say, we can either make you better or we will make you better. Which one do you want? Which one do you want? Either you could join us.
I see. What I think is interesting is I never really thought of, like, the term Nazi was not something I thought of or would apply to the Viltrumites.
It's the mustache, isn't it? You can tell me. It's the mustache.
Well, but the Nazis did raise their kids, and they did put them through camps where they didn't kill each other per se, but they were violent against each other to follow this bizarrely tortured notion of Nietzscheism's Übermensch and try to create this Viltrumitian sort of, we are.
Well,
I mean, they did.
The reason why I didn't think of it in terms of like when he said 1,000 years, I didn't think 1,000-year Reich. I actually started thinking about species, right? Is that you know, like when he said, well, you killed that guy, and he's like, well, you know, what's the difference? He would have died in another 50 years. At which point I'm like, 50 years is a lot of life. But then he said,
but not to him.
Like, what happens when, you know, what's that 50 years going to mean 1,000 years from now? And I was like, wow, that's brutal. And then I remembered that, you know, just the other day I killed one of those little centipede thingies.
That was the whole point. That was the whole point.
Exactly. And I think that that's something where because we look at aliens and make them as much like us as possible, that they really cease to be aliens. They cease to be more differential representations of power, right? You know, because, you know, just go back to our earlier thing we talked about, you know, like cows. What if cows are involved, right? Well, what if an alien species came to this planet and that alien species was most closely related to cows? What would they do?
You eat burgers?
Oh my God!
Exactly. But whenever we have the aliens come to Earth and they start wiping us out, we're like, oh my God, look at how evil and warlike they are. And I'm like, nah, maybe they're just related to all the cows, or even worse, the chickens.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it's just like if we showed up on an alien planet and they had monkeys and they were being eaten left and right, we probably wouldn't get along with them. So I actually think that human alien relations are much more fraught because of things like that.
Yeah, I think that. Oh, go ahead. I thought they'd go ahead.
But I think that this whole issue of I think it's interesting because once you said Nazis, I immediately saw that, right? Yeah. I could see where you were coming from on that. And I don't think it's an unreasonable way of reading into this. But I also think that I also think that's one of the challenges of this story, right? This story, once people start thinking of it in that direction, becomes very black and white and very, very hard to ask questions. And I think that's one of the difficulties of the story because once you do the Nazi comparison, no one's going to talk about the good qualities of the Nazi party. They just aren't.
Right.
Or the people who are going to be branded.
Well, I mean, and at this point in the story, no one's talking about the good qualities of the Viltrumites.
Right.
I mean, it's been set up such a way that, as Victor said, they're going to.
It's been hinted.
Oh,
yeah.
See, the thing is, at the time, I mean, because I've done quite a bit of reading on German history, and all I'll say is, at the time, at that particular time in Western history, there was a very species-oriented view of different groups. And it wasn't just rhetoric. I mean, the way that the Nazis dehumanized the Jewish people in terms of animalistic references, that was all to do exactly the sort of thing you just mentioned, Stanford, right? Oh, that was just an insect.
Now what's really interesting is based on the show, there is this dichotomy that's at war with that concept. And I have to ask this question, not as someone who has read forward and knows, but just based on what you've seen in the show, when we apply this concept of Nazism or anything that Nolan said, is that the Viltrumites, or is that a Viltrumite who learned human history and the things that he said were to relate to a human version of a Viltrumite, not necessarily what he would say to another Viltrumite? Does the, like you said, everything is everything, is where he is and who he's talking to, does that create a context for what he said? Because if you think about it, one of the things that they don't do in a general sense is they don't dehumanize anybody. They're literally saying, you can be a part of us, you can be a part of us, you can be a part of us. The only difference is either for reasons that will become obvious later, you can either choose to be a part of us or we will make you a part of us. But the bottom line is you are one of us. You are equal to us. We are going to elevate you to as much of our level as we can possibly get you. We're not dehumanizing you. We're almost demanding that you raise up to hit our level for our benefit once you find out why. But that is what they're doing. They're literally trying to raise everybody up in the universe to their level, not dehumanizing, which I think is a very different sort of scenario.
I'm going to have to make sure I read the rest. One thing I just want to quickly say is that obviously what Kirkman understands is that all is one and one is all. And he finds a way to slowly unravel our minds in our difference, that's a group, and he's trying to show guys everything's related. I think it might have been the opening episode, few episodes, there's that group of aliens that attack the Earth and they always die because the Flaxans, their time is so much different. And that's a nice little way of just introducing this idea of relationality, right? Time works differently for them than it does for us. And it's like, oh, wow. Kind of like what happened in War of the Worlds. Oh, they got killed by a bug, right?
Yep.
Just showing these relationalities is very, very clever way of getting to the larger picture. One is all.
That goes back to the idea of power. Here they come with this exemplary force that generally speaking, the heroes of Earth could not stop, but it was something as powerful as they were. It was something as simple as time. The everyday occurrence of time is what was defeating them, because power is something. What is powerful changes. You know, we think
context. Absolutely.
Yeah, we think advanced technology is powerful, but then the literal tickings of a clock stop these guys.
Yeah.
It also points out the extent to which the story of evolution is not the story of power.
Boom.
And I think that that's it's a really common misconception. But when you start really getting into evolution, it's actually sort of this mixture of opportunity and preparedness. Now we talk about power, but it's not really about power, because think of all these species that can't hurt nobody. Who doing just fine, right? Right. You know, but I think that,
well, they're not. The grass isn't doing fine, though. I mean, they destroy too. They don't destroy themselves, and gazelles don't destroy lions, but they intake, transform, and deconstruct energy, right, to sustain themselves. So it's not destruction in terms of biting and blah, but it is destruction in terms of capturing the energy,
consumption.
Right, but evolution. What I'm saying is evolution is not like we talk about survival of the fittest as if that's connected to evolution. Being the fittest is not being the most powerful. True. And that's what
being able to capture available energy,
right,
in whatever form that means. Yes,
and that's my point. That's my point. Is that we, you know, there's something about us where we read power into things where power is not the driving force.
Right.
And I think that comes that's actually a much bigger issue.
I love this conversation.
Really good point. That's a really good point.
A tree, man, is super powerful when it comes to capturing sunlight.
Right.
Right, but the way you just said it, you didn't have to say a tree is super powerful in capturing sunlight. You could have said a tree is highly efficient at capturing sunlight.
Right.
Well, but a lion is highly efficient at capturing a gazelle.
But when we use the word power, we're talking about being able to subject something else.
I think that's the very interesting part right there.
Yeah, right? I think we're talking about power in different ways, and that's perfectly fine. That's why.
Well, yeah, because like when you say that, like, okay, so what is the most powerful element that we have in our consideration? It would be like the sun, right? It powers, it warms, it heats, like it energizes. But here is a tree on our planet that takes everything that the sun could do, and it's all dominating destructive force, and it goes, that's delicious. Right. I think like that's exactly what you mean. Like when we say power, we need to think bigger than just, oh, I'm stronger than you, because that's not really what power is.
But maybe power isn't the word we should be using.
Right.
Because power is all, when we talk about power, that is a concept.
Exactly.
I love this conversation.
Exactly.
To describe a series of relationships.
Yeah.
One where something can literally control something else.
Right.
There's ways of existing where you're not where you're not trying to do that. And I think that that's what gets interesting. Like even with your example of trees, right? You know, I mean, trees are much more complex. I mean, because we only hear within a narrow range of, our hearing is in a narrow range. You know, there's studies where they've already proven that, like, when you cut down a tree, it screams.
Right.
But it's outside of our range of hearing.
So we don't hear
when you pull grass, it does that, but it's outside of our range of hearing.
Which is why any vegetarian that tries to play the "I'm better than you" card because I don't eat anything with the face, you're still killing living things. You're still killing living things.
Energy. And then the argument is, yeah, but they don't suffer. I've seen that argument made. They don't suffer.
You think they suffer.
And it's like, well, you ever ask the grass how it feels?
That's because you're deaf to the suffering.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Because that right there is a version of your Nazism where you're saying because they're a lower life form and they don't scream like I scream, therefore their screams don't exist.
I mean, but one thing that I thought was really interesting, and it's part of the reason, and I'll be honest, it's one of the reasons why I didn't see this as an issue of totalitarianism or Nazism, is that I can't remember his name. The character, there was the alien that he fought with the one eye.
Alan,
who was like testing
Alan
him,
the
right?
alien. Yep.
Yeah. Alan the alien's really interesting. Like, just in the few things he says, you start to see a much bigger universe out there.
Mhm.
Like first he's testing Invincible, right? He's like, oh yeah, well, it's my job to test you on behalf of this United Federation of
Hey,
Planets
guys.
that we got here. But then also, like, and then there's kind of this weird thing about what happens when he writes women as well,
Mhm.
where you get these kind of odd, like,
We're talking about Kirkman.
Mhm.
yeah, you know, and
Yeah.
it's not something where I think like I wouldn't I'm not going to say like he's a bad guy or anything like that, but
Right.
there's definitely something in there where it's fraught and troubled. Like I think back to Kirkman and I think back to Michonne in the Walking Dead comic.
Mhm.
You know, you're gonna just have this black woman be raped for 5 days.
Jesus, crazy. It's
Um,
crazy.
You know,
It went
and then
on.
even her response to just cut off his penis, I was
Right.
like,
No, there's more than that.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
and
we
then,
would yeah, no, we would do way more than that.
it's not about whether you would do more, but what he did is he had that, and somehow it really felt like this cathartic moment of cutting off his penis was somehow going to relieve her of the trauma. And I'm looking at seriously gendered and serious, like, racial trauma all
Mhm.
in one thing
Mhm.
in that, right? I mean, yeah, I you know, and yeah, I was just like,
Yeah,
I actually almost stopped reading the book because of that.
I mean, I'm not even mad at that. And I definitely think that there's a sense of white man's burden that comes from Kirkman's writing. Like I said, he is from Kentucky, not even necessarily like Louisville or Lexington to say like, oh, he's got like a big city, mentality. I think he's from technically the sticks,
Right.
and so he at least has the wherewithal or awareness to say, I don't necessarily have the authenticity of voice. And with that, piece with Michonne, what he said was, through this writing, not like I know what his intention was, but it's like, I think this is the worst thing that a guy could do to a woman, right? And then as a response, what's the worst thing as a guy that could happen to me? And this is how he responded with it, not recognizing that based on gender and race, you haven't even scratched the surface of what you actually did in terms of what you think is the worst thing that can happen to a woman, let
But
alone
also
a black woman.
and the repercussions and the
Right,
trauma
right.
that would be there. I mean, it's
Right.
just
He doesn't know it, and didn't stop to think, is this authentic in its presentation? Is this enough? He didn't ask somebody. Like, he could have definitely gone to somebody and be like, hey, listen, this is a story, this is what I'm trying to do, this is what I'm trying to say, what do you think? And I don't think that he asked that question. If he did, I think it would have been, detoured in a very specific way where somebody would be like, no, we need more. You have to think about this more.
So what I love about this conversation is anybody who writes, is diagnosing themselves for the world, right? For example, Winter Soldier. I watched the Wizard World panel on that last year, and Billy brought out the point about that the Vietnamese man was left out of the family build the ship back thing at the end. And what I'm trying to say is, you can't put words on paper. You can't put words out of your mouth. Everything's everything. And everybody sees what you're focusing, what you're ignoring. What you focus on reveals just as much about what you ignore is what you focus on. And there's no way to be a writer and reach some analytic peak of that was clean, that was pure. Now that can be critiqued, of course. Oh, I see what you ignored there. You ignored what it meant to actually exist as this type of person. I totally dig on that. What I hope we do is continue to do that. Hey, we saw what you were ignoring, because all of us are ignoring shit that people are going to be seeing in 20 years.
Right.
There's no way you can write now and see everything.
That's true.
I don't know. I'm not trying to defend Kirkman or
No.
anything.
I think that's a very good point to make. But what happens is what it does, or what it should inform, is our perspective of saying, we as consumers of content, if we can recognize, okay, why didn't he do this? Was he purposefully trying to say this thing, or was he ill-equipped and maybe didn't have the resources at hand to make it better, or someone to tell him, don't do that, because you know, you're stepping into a territory that you don't even know. And the truth is, you don't know what you don't know until somebody tells you. And I think, like, I can see Kirkman like listening to this conversation, and he should, by the way, and hearing what you said, Stanford, and being like, oh damn, I didn't think about that. And you're absolutely right. And then maybe as he grows as a writer, the next thing that he does, he would be better apt to address that thing. But here is him in virgin territory for himself, unaware of what it is that he is actively saying or inactively saying by his portrayal. And I think that is the true benefit of critique, when somebody brings that to you and you go, I didn't even see that. That's me.
Exactly. I think we're all limited by our experiences and research. I mean, because that was even my issue with Walking Dead. Actually, I have. So, and it actually comes back to my experience. It specifically comes back to my experience as an archaeologist. Is that I looked at this situation where you have a small group of people in a survival setting in a hostile territory, and I'm like, that sure enough is not the way the social relations would work. Right. It would not work that way. And I know that from being, in particular, there's one archaeological dig I was on that was in Suriname. And we were just like put out into the jungle. It was a small group of us. We're essentially in the northern part of the northern tip of the Amazon jungle, right? And it's incredibly hostile. And just what just how we interacted and how conflict was managed and what conflict meant is so different under those circumstances. And so when I see this, like, oh, well, we're just going to do this, we're just going to leave someone behind, or we're going to vote and we're going to kill this person in our group. It's like a lot of that stuff doesn't work in those circumstances. Right. And it doesn't work in those circumstances because everybody knows that people have memories. And you just start with that. You start with the fact that people have memories, and you also start by how high your level of interdependence is. Yes, well said. If there's a group of 10 of you, right, it does not take much for somebody to eat more than they're supposed to deprive other people of food completely. If you're in a group of 10 and 3 people are hurt and require care, that means one person has to take care of the 3. So you went from dividing all the chores amongst 10 people to dividing all the chores amongst 6 people. And that means not getting enough food for 10 from those 6 people. It's a downward cycle. And people understand that very quickly, or at least the people who survive. And so some of the activities that some of the way, I think that there's a very Hollywoodization of stories of survival. And that's something I'm very fascinated by. The show Survivor is also really problematic in these terms, because it's this idea that everything is resolved, that you have to resolve things through conflict. Well, the act of engaging in conflict is oftentimes a bigger threat to the group than what the conflict is over itself, and everybody realizes that. And then
I think what we often underestimate, we act like we teach our kids these words, these ways of thinking, and then that's what they live their life by. It could very well be the case that you got a kid, they've got an infrastructure, a family around them, and the words just fill in a post hoc explanation of how things work. And then you get people in a different world, they're there. They do it differently because that world demands it. And whatever words they need to create that space and make it work, they make it work. So, Yeah, I've not seen many dramatizations that capture that well, and I'm not really thinking of it right now. But words usually for me are more post hoc filler than they are
Right.
guiding principles.
Well,
And
bringing it back to Invincible and the plight of the Viltrumites and their presence in the universe, that is exactly what the situation is.
yeah,
It's the matter of the words that they're using, the perspective that people have on their actions that is making them this threat.
yeah,
If they explain what their situation was differently, it would be a very different like outcome. People wouldn't fear the Viltrumites. They would be sorry. They would feel sorry for them. Like,
Well, I'm also what I think. But I mean, back to what we are talking about earlier with Alan the alien, right?
mm-hmm,
What I thought was interesting is so he comes in and he's testing Invincible to see if Earth might be worthy of joining this group, right?
coalition of planets.
Yeah, the coalition, right? And then in the end, when we see him and he's like, "Oh my God, I didn't tell you. I didn't realize I made a mistake. There's a Viltrumite here. You're off limits. Blah 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 blah." Right? That whole conversation was actually the thing that was the real game changer for me,
Mm-hmm.
because what it established is there's this bigger universe, i.e. ecosystem out there,
mhm,
in which there are a coalition of planets who have figured out how to create some sort of way of working together.
Mm-hmm.
They don't work with the Viltrumites, but it doesn't say that they think the Viltrumites are totally evil. The fact that they've engaged in some sort of agreement where they're like, oh, we're not going to go onto a place that the Viltrumites plant
Have
their
already
flag
claimed.
first.
Yep.
they're our
That
dark
tells
ops group.
me- that tells me like wow, like the Viltrumites still may be the good guys. The coalition of planets may be the good guys, but it tells me that it actually upends a whole bunch of other things.
Mm-hmm.
Because even in this story, to me the most horrific scene was when Omni-Man grabbed Invincible and made him look face first at the train that was going on them, and
Yes.
he just saw all these people just being like just ground up by the
Yes.
wreckage, right?
Yes.
And I was like, and that, and having the memory of when the Flaxons came in and just started wiping people out, it just kind of put a lot of stuff. It actually recontextualized a lot of this violence and death. And like, I'm like, okay, in this world, if you're a superhero, and by now they've established that superheroes are always seeing people get blown apart, that they're doing crazy stuff, like trying to catch someone who's being thrown through the air, and the person goes splat against their chest, that kind of stuff. Like that's what the superhero life is. And that the government, I love this idea that the government has a medical corps that goes around to try and put people back together. That was precious.
Mm-hmm.
So what it does tell me is that regardless of what the world is like as a civilian, that you can't be a superhero without having a high tolerance for death and destruction of the human body.
Mm-hmm.
And then what you do is you fill in words like they are insects.
Right.
It's when and can I just ask you guys, that subway bus scene or the subway car scene,
Mm-hmm.
I know it was unbelievably violent, and I thought it was one of the more imaginative, creative ways of making a point I had ever seen. And I'm not like, oh my God, that's cool. I'm like, oh my God, as you were saying, Steph, Mark is doing this. I mean, in other words, his essence of what he is being shown to him by his father in this most horrible of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And because I thought, I've never seen that point made that way. I thought it was incredibly impactful. And I'm not going to use words good or bad. I just think they made the point they wanted dramatically. They very much made the point. And I don't think it was just to do more gore.
No. It definitely has a point, and it's on par with its commentary as the Lion King statement of the circle of life. When Mufasa and Simba are talking about their role in the circle, and he's like, the antelope, we go after them, and someone's like, wait, but we eat the antelope. What are you talking about? Like, there's got to be a hierarchy. And he's like, no, because when we die, our bodies become the grass, and the antelope eat the grass, and we eat the antelope. So everything has this sense of a cycle of things, right? Like, it has a place. Mark, you have to understand that your place is not limited to this spot. Like, you can't think of yourself in this way, because this is not the totality of your essence. It is not the totality of your being. If you keep thinking in just this term of I eat the antelope, and therefore I'm greater than the antelope, you're going to miss it. Just like if you think I live on this planet, therefore I'm going to live and die just like the other people on this planet, you are wrong. You are getting it 100% wrong. And I will prove it to you in the worst possible way. Just you being here in this space kills all these people, and nothing happens to you. You are different. You are part of something that is a way bigger cycle that is not limited to the frailty of human existence. It is not limited to that. And you have to think beyond that if you're going to understand your place in the greater scheme of everything that I'm telling you actually exists. Like, you have to understand this.
I got to tell you what, if I suspect one of the goals of that was the goal of writing this for Kirkman, is to relativize who our being and to put it in this all is one, kind of one is all space, and make us re-examine power. It's amazing the destabilization when you encounter that idea, when you sort of decenter yourself in the cosmos. This Nietzsche talked a lot about this. Once we got rid of God, what are we? We're going to see there are just an infinite number of possible reactions to destabilizing, to decentering that narrative. Some are very violent, some are not. And I do personally feel as if that's kind of what's happening in the 21st century, is a destabilization. There's a movement called post-humanism, right? It's the destabilization of humanity as kind of the centering of the narrative. And that destabilization has like unpredictable consequences. And I do think it's the necessary move to get us to one is all is one. I do think that decentering is necessary to do that. It's just that all is one is all does not answer the questions asked by are you good or evil?
Yeah, no,
it doesn't answer
matter
those questions. And it's just because, the Ubermensch, a concept created by Nietzsche, it fueled the idea of a superior race. And that's not what Nietzsche was trying to get at.
Right. He was talking about being a superior self,
yes,
not overall, but somebody took it, you took something good and you framed it in a way that definitely went bad, because there is no legitimate sentiment that is good or bad. It is literally what you do with it, which is why, again, what Stanford is saying, we got to get rid of the term power, because we associate a certain level of negativity and or positivity to the term that doesn't inherently exist. And that's the issue here, is that this thing just is. Power is just a concept of what is, and you have to be very careful about how you use it. Like, the things that you guys are going to find out. Oh my God, I can't wait. It is ridiculous.
So let's make a deal right now. Let's all agree to read the whole thing. We can set a date and come back and talk about it maybe sometime before season 2. We can't wait for the whole series, because first of all, you're never sure if it's gonna
also true
happen.
Well, didn't they get approved for season 2 and 3?
Yeah, I can't see them not. And if it turns out to be as rich as you're telling us, Victor, it's not just another story. It's a profound reorganization of being, right? And you see this decentering going on in a lot of pop culture, which I love right now. The HBO's Watchmen, Lovecraft Country. I would argue WandaVision did some fantastic decentering. And that's how people are telling stories now. And it goes back to your notion of constituency, Stanford, right? Whose story, whose way of being is being expressed? What are they sustaining? What are they ignoring? What are they? And is this leading us to the point where, if all is one is all, right? Then we all inevitably ignore, right? There is no way to escape things not entering into your thoughts, things being destroyed because you exist. Let's just say destroyed. Let's say being deconstructed because you exist. And then we get a little closer to something like a Hinduism, Shiva sort of being the creator and the destroyer, and not being able to be just the good creator and the bad destroyer. So I think these stories are really kind of pushing us that way. We'll see if the culture can survive the destabilization.
Love it. I love it.
Yeah. So any final comments you guys want to make on this season of Invincible?
It was a dynamic showcase. If I'm being honest, if I'm being 100% honest, I thought that the first episode was decent but boring up until the very end. Like I was like literally watching, I was like, okay, this is a cute version. And then we got to the end, and I've warned every person that I've told to watch this show, you will sit up and you will exclaim some form of expletive during that last moment. Like I promise you, you can be the holiest person possible. Yep. You're gonna say something that is on par with an expletive when you see where that goes. It is phenomenal. That moment saved everything for me, because at first I was gonna be like, this was cute. I don't know if I'm in it for the long term, but that moment happened. I'm like, oh, okay.
No, man.
Yes.
You're right. The first chunk, that was like Saturday morning in the 70s. And it was fine. You know, I dug Saturday morning in the 70s. And all of a sudden, whoa, wait a minute. Who got a hold of this? Okay. They did their work. They took me on a snoozy fast. And I'll suck my thumb for a while.
Right. You're like, okay, where else are we going with this?
Exactly. Man. No, good for them. And that was all on. It's like, okay, this is your little roller coaster you're used to. You know, just relax. How about you, Stanford?
I mean, I'm thinking something similar, which is you definitely got to get past the first 2 episodes, and once you get to the first 2 episodes, you start to really realize what's going on, and that there's more going on than meets the eye. I'm going to say this: I am really looking forward to see how they give us the world outside our world. And and I'm really curious to see not just how they show us the world outside our world, but how they show that through the perspective of the people on our world.
That's gonna be
excellent. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me for this fantastic conversation. I'm not sure if I'm gonna send it off in one big podcast or break it up into a few, because we did some great jumping around here.
Yeah, we did.
And it completely addresses the questions I love to address, both in my personal life, my professional life, and my geek life. And I really do think pop culture is leading the way these days. And I think you guys are at the forefront of understanding how that's happening. So it's my absolute pleasure to be here with you. Why don't you go ahead and tell everyone where they can find you on social media? We'll start with Victor.
Oh, okay. You can find me at Vantage In-House on all forms of social media. You can also look me up at You Create Comics. That's the letter U, CRE, the number 8, comics.com, where I'm actually creating programming and products to help you build your own comic universe from start to finish.
Fantastic. How about you, Stanford?
Well, I mean, it's pretty easy. You can find me at SW Carpenter on Facebook, Twitter, and Clubhouse.
Excellent. You can find me on Twitter at dark_loops, and you can find all Dark Loops Productions podcasts at the Dark Loops Productions channel on YouTube. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, just send them, write them in this YouTube page, or send an email to darkloopsproductions@gmail.com, and we'll talk about it the next time the 3 of us get together to talk about this fantastic series. So there it is, from all of us to all of you. Big hugs, and please remember, we didn't come up with a saying, guys. So what do you guys want to say? What do you guys want to say? And I'll cut this part out so we look like we know what we're doing.
Immortal forever.
All right. Is that cool with you, Stanford, or you got another idea? Okay, this is
I was
definitely
thinking
staying in.
Invincible with a question mark.
Oh yeah, no. I like that. I like that.
What?
What'd you say?
Invincible? Question mark. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So there it is. From all of us to all of you, big hugs. And please remember,
Invincible?
All right, bye-bye.